The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start the town hall here just momentarily. While you wait, we're going to go ahead and put up a little poll for you. And if you wouldn't mind answering that while we wait, and we'll go ahead and get the broadcast started right at 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's town hall. I appreciate you taking time to do this poll, and we're going to go ahead and close this poll out and get started with our town hall today. All right. It looks like the poll is still up, and what we want to do is go ahead and get the screen shared so we can start the meeting here. All right, so we have a nice cross section of folks here this morning. We have around 600 people who are registered to join us this morning, and there is ample opportunities for folks to join right now as well as later in the afternoon. To get started, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and welcome all of you to today's town hall. Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome to today's town hall that's co-hosted by the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division, and the Colorado Department of Agriculture. My name's Rebecca Laurie. I'm the Stakeholder and Innovation Strategist here at DORA. And before we get into the program, I just wanted to do a quick review of today's agenda. So first, as an attendee today, we'll go through some of the features of GoToWebinar very quickly. And then after hearing from our introductory speakers, the morning's program is divided into 3 topical segments. Each segment will last approximately 40 minutes or so, with some time for Q&A at the end of each segment. Then we'll wrap up our conversations at around 12:25. And panelists, if you are still joining, I do ask that you go ahead and keep your cameras off and keep yourself on mute. So we'll get through the agenda and then we'll get the program started. So like I said, when we checked this morning, there were over 600 people who registered to attend. And I think that just speaks volumes about the importance of today's topics. And with me today are my support team from Team Dora, Courtney Roberts and Chaz Seiler. So Chaz and Courtney, go ahead and turn on your camera and wave hello. And Courtney will be monitoring and asking questions that come in for the panelists. And if you're experiencing any difficulties with using GoToWebinar, you can also put that in the questions box for Chaz to try and troubleshoot for you. And speaking of the questions box, because of the volume today, we're going to be taking written questions. So what you'll see in your control panel is a questions box, which you can put in your questions or comments and send it to the organizers and the panelists, or you can send it for everybody to view. We have limited time after each segment, but even if we don't get to your question, we'll be compiling all the questions that we receive and develop an online FAQ. So if time allows, we'll post a couple of more of those polls today. And if you look in that handout section of the control panel, you'll be able to download some of the documents, including this agenda. And then after the town hall, you'll be receiving a survey asking for your feedback. So we have a packed schedule today. Let's get started. First, I want to introduce Ian Sieb with the governor's office. Ian, can you turn on your camera and go ahead and unmute? Ian, if you're on, go ahead and unmute yourself. Nope, not working.
There we go.
There we go. We love technology, don't we? All right. Still no?
There we go.
All right.
There we go. I was forcibly muted. It wasn't me. Well, good morning. On behalf of Governor Jared Polis, welcome to our second topic-based town hall for the cannabis industry, focused on banking, insurance, financial services, and economic development. A very special thanks to the Department of Regulatory Agencies Executive Director Salazar, Rebecca Laurie, and everyone on their team who assisted us in bringing us together for this event today. We now have a Colorado state tradition to come together at these town hall meetings around the state to ensure we're listening and supporting the cannabis industry and the public. We've previously conducted these primarily in person, and they were regionally based around the state outside of Denver. This is the second time this year we've taken a single theme and wrapped a town hall session around it. So we're really pleased that you could all join us today at our sustainability RSVPs and 160 attendees. I know we had over 600 RSVPs today. We'll learn how many people were actually able to join us, but it shows to us that these are important topics that are worthy of this level of discussion. As the other speakers are going to highlight, banking and insurance across the cannabis industry is frankly a non-negotiable. Know that we're doing everything that we can at the state level, and as you'll learn today, we have a regular dialogue with a lot of our federal partners. Before we get to the main substance of today's discussion and welcome our experts, I want to provide you all with an understanding of the governor's office priorities for the industry for this year. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Unfortunately, there is a little lag.
Okay. I meant to the third slide. There we go. So we have a governor's cannabis cabinet. I don't need to read the slides to you, but this is basically how we work out. So we meet once a month to share everything that we're working on with our priorities and our wild goals. Next slide, please. So this is our wildly important priority for this next year, and virtually everything that we're doing with our wildly important goals focus on this wildly important policy. Led by the governor's operations team and myself, being the special advisor on cannabis, we bring all the executive directors and their teams across the state of Colorado's various agencies to discuss opportunities and issues that are specific. We meet once a month. We provide updates on the wildly goals. So in order to achieve this priority, we've broken down into 4 wildly important goals. And each division that's represented here has a WIG that they're responsible for that's to achieve by this fiscal year, which is this coming June 30th of 2021. You'll notice that some of these WIGs touch on several divisions or agencies across the state, which is by design. And we believe it allows for better interagency communication or progressing cannabis as a whole within state government. Next slide, please. Let's start with the most salient WIG, Dora's WIG, which is why we're here today on banking and financial services. There's a whole host of panelists and speakers that are going to join us today, as you'll learn, in an effort to help us reach this goal. And marijuana licensees, you're going to get a survey from MED about access to banking. Please answer this, as it's incredibly helpful to us to understand the scope of the challenges that licensees face. Next slide, please. So next, we're going to the Marijuana Enforcement Division and Public Safety's WIG, focused on increasing diversity in the marijuana industry, social equity, and expungements. In October of this year, Governor Polis pardoned 2,732 previous marijuana convictions in the state of Colorado. If you're interested in learning about it, we have a website, comarijuanapardons.com, and know that you're going to continue to hear about record clearing related activities throughout the year. You're going to continue to see ongoing town halls like this, and you're going to be hearing more about a technical assistance program with a special focus on assisting those in underrepresented communities that's going to be coming to fruition this summer at the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Next slide, please. The third, this is Colorado Department of Agriculture's WIG on focus on increasing Colorado's hemp producers' commodity market share through increased partnerships. And CDA started distributing a hemp newsletter earlier this year with valuable information about the program and current events. You can sign up for it on the CDA website if you are not receiving them. The Markets Division at CDA, along with OEDIT and the Governor's Office, meets regularly to review existing and new potential projects for engagements to support this WIG. A lot of exciting things. Some of you may have read about the work that we're doing with Patagonia currently. Next slide, please. So finally, this is CDPHE's focus to increase the number of applicants for the ELP for both marijuana and hemp businesses. We touched on this a little bit during our town hall. Currently, we have both marijuana and hemp companies in the program. Smokies and Livewell are marijuana companies, and Panacea, Bluebird Botanicals, Hammer, Charlotte's Web, and Leanna Organics are all of our hemp members of the Environmental Leadership Program. Next slide, please. Hopefully this gives you some reassurances that your government is really committed to making the environment for the cannabis industry equitable with regulations, much like other industries we can, as long as it's within our powers of the state. So the last thing that I want to say before I hand the mic over, if you will, is that our next town hall that we are looking for scheduling sometime in January is going to be focused on social equity for marijuana businesses. It's going to be specifically about assisting prospective social equity applicants with the application process and answering any questions. There's a lot more to come with social equity and with hemp and really all of these. And with that, I will pass it back over to Rebecca. thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, Ian. You can go ahead and turn off your camera, and then I'm pleased to introduce Executive Director Patty Salazar. So Patty, please turn on your camera and hit unmute.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you all for attending this morning. When it comes to addressing cannabis banking and insurance, one of the most important aspects to make headway in this space is to keep the conversation going, and that's what we're here to do today. Now, as long as marijuana remains illegal at the federal level and hemp has the potential to be non-compliant, and until there is legislation at the national level, this issue will continue to be complicated, and we recognize that. We also respect and appreciate that there are legislators, including Colorado's own Representative Perlmutter, who are working to change that. And we will be hearing more about the developments taking place at the federal level from Colin Edinson with the Congressman's office later this morning. Here in Colorado, we understand that marijuana is legal at the state level and hemp is legal nationally and should be treated as such. As long as legal cannabis businesses work in a primarily cash environment, there will continue to be an inherent public safety issue, as well as the higher risk for illicit activities such as money laundering. Therefore, as Ian outlined, the position of Governor Polis and the goal of our agency is to help ensure that legal cannabis businesses are not shut out from critical financial and insurance services, but rather are let in, provided that a regulatory safety and soundness of our banks and credit unions and the law are not compromised. Ultimately, we recognize that the decision on whether a service for a legal cannabis industry is entirely up to individual banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions. We recognize that as financial regulators, our work is to ensure that our supervised institutions remain healthy and sound, and we are not in a position to compel them to provide services to certain industries. However, what we can do, and as I said, is to keep the conversation going and work towards a specific goal. To do that, this past year, we established a roadmap to cannabis banking, which we'll pull up on a slide right now. We call it our Roadmap 1.0, and our primary goal is to encourage our state chartered financial institutions to consider offering primary services like checking and savings accounts to cannabis businesses by providing a framework. The divisions of banking and the division of financial services, both housed within DORA, took the lead to engage state chartered institutions throughout the state and are making progress towards this goal. Today, more of our state chartered financial institutions now serve legal cannabis businesses clients than they did just a year ago. As we continue along our roadmap, our next goal is to better understand why some states registered and licensed cannabis businesses remain unbanked and how economic conditions, particularly this past year as we're all facing a global pandemic, might be affecting this, as well as talking to cannabis businesses about their needs to access capital. And so I will echo the pitch that Ian made earlier. When you receive that survey, we strongly do encourage you to participate by providing a response so that we can have a better informed roadmap. This town hall really is just one more stop on our roadmap. And before we continue on with the agenda, I want to acknowledge and thank Rebecca Laurie for all of her hard work to coordinate the successful virtual event and extend my deepest appreciation to all of those who made time on their busy schedules to present today. And I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation ahead.
Thank you so much, Patty. You can go ahead and turn your camera off if you like and put yourself on mute. And now we'll hear from Jim Burrock, Director of the Marijuana Enforcement Division at the Colorado Department of Revenue. So Jim, oh, yep, looks like you're unmuted and ready to go. Thanks, Jim. Oh, hold on, Jim, we can't hear you actually. Okay, this is, you know, our current world when we're trying to deal with technology here. Why don't you go ahead and we'll go ahead and introduce Wonderad, and you can perhaps troubleshoot why sound is not coming through for the audience. Does that sound good? Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm going to go ahead and close your camera out and then just pop back on when you think you have the issue resolved. And if not, you can go ahead and toss it over to Shannon if you want. Hi, Wondrad.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Everyone, this is Wondrad Gabreu with he's the director of the Division of Plant Industry at CDA, which oversees the hemp program. So Wondrad, it looks like you're freezing up just a little bit, but we can hear you. So go ahead.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, and on behalf of Colorado Department of Ag and Commissioner Kate Greenberg, I would like to appreciate the DORA for organizing this financial panel, and particularly to discuss the challenge the hemp industry and cannabis industry have in our state. As we all know, Colorado is one of the pioneer states to begin commercial cultivation in the U.S. and with the first year, 2014, we had 131 registrants registering 1,811 acres only. But in 2019, in just 5 years, and particularly after 2018 Farm Bill, we had 2,712 registrants registering a record level of 88,743 acres and 15.2 million square feet. This is a tremendous growth, and that also have shown an interest across the nation with the 2018 Farm Bill. But however, with the oversupply and market correction and new states coming to join also cultivating hemp in the end, in addition to the COVID economic downturn, last year we have seen close to 50% reduction in our registration, and in 2020 we had 1,400 registrants and registered 40,461 acres at the peak of the growing period. Still, Colorado is leading the nation in terms of acreage, both in registered land area and particularly in our cultivated land. And we have launched a number of sessions to improve our outreach, and particularly, as Ian earlier mentioned, the symposiums we had and also the newsletters we have started to issue. I think this really helped us to educate and communicate our regulations, our rules, what we have and what's allowed, what's not, and what's new also, particularly with as being a federal program, which we felt that it's very important to educate and communicate both the public and at the same time also our registrants. And we had our annual hemp advisory committee yesterday, and then we have also conveyed part of the overall annual progress we have made, and also including the enforcement and the progress that we have made. And over the past years, particularly since 2019, the last 1.5 years, we have increased our FTE of the program from 3.1 FTE to 7 now. So we feel that we are able to accommodate the new USDA program and also to provide efficient and service for our registrants. We have reduced the registration period from 30 days now to, depending on the season, from 3 to 7 days, which is a tremendous leap that we have made. As we all know, we had a CHAMP stakeholder platform immediately to really understand what the impact of the USDA or the IFR has, and also to learn on our experience and also to look for best practices elsewhere. Therefore, we have done the stakeholder engagement, including that included more than 140 stakeholders, and also have worked on 8 supply chains. One of those supply chain areas are banking and insurance, and then this was found to be very critical for the advancement of the sector, where the finance is very important and it's very emerging. There are a number of challenges that the industry has been facing, and also we have also learned that the financial and the insurance sector is also being challenged. Although there is willingness, there are areas that need to be addressed. The final report is now all completed, and we'll have the final published CHAMP report very soon. The challenge, one of those challenges particularly the industry has, is the supply with the finance and insurance is lack of confidence of the finance sector to really understand the industry and the potential risks, particularly related to the THC, and lack of dependable data on harvest, on market, and various risk factors. And therefore, the agreement during our CHAMP and also the commitment from CDA is that we understand that this information need to be made available for the financial sector so that they can make informed decision and therefore they can manage the risk of the industry. What we have seen, particularly in our end-year review yesterday, was the non-compliance have significantly reduced, which is, we are very, very happy to report that. There are a couple of factors contribute. Number one is the ability of the grower to manage their crop, and also the harvest cycle, and also the genetics, hopefully that will improve and will have significant impact in the coming years. Therefore, I think this is a good leap or progress what we have made. Therefore, we look for, on behalf of the hemp industry, this forum is an opportunity to further communicate, to further narrow a gap between the financial sector and the industry, and also to identify areas where we can jointly work, and also as CDA, as a primary regulatory agency, that we would like to continue to participate and address all those challenges. So the next, our priority in the area would be to continue our flagship project, particularly the Center of Excellence. It's we believe that still we will finish the preparatory step for this year, and then we'll launch in the coming after the mid of 2021, or we'll have a functional Center of Excellence in 2022, and also the traceability, which will have an impact and also contribute for the information sharing. That will also contribute for the financial sector, will also hopefully will come. As we all know, my final remark is the IFR is extended till the end of September 2021. Therefore, we are implementing under the Colorado program, and therefore this is also an added advantage for all stakeholders. And we are also looking for a risk to submit the Colorado hemp state plan once USDA issue their final rule. So it's pending, expecting the final rule. Finally, thank you so much for inviting us, and also being a co-organizer of this forum. And I look forward to hear and to learn, and also the industry. Thank you, Rebecca. Back to you.
Thank you, Wandrad. You can go ahead and turn off your camera. And we welcome back Jim. Hi, Jim. Okay, wait, hold on. We still don't have sound for you, unfortunately. Okay, I'm reading lips here. This is the best. I'm reading lips, and he's saying that he's going to punt this over to Shannon Gray, who is going to go ahead and give the update. So hold on one moment, and we will get Shannon on screen here. Shannon, it looks like you have the capability to go on screen. Go ahead and share your camera and take yourself on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Wonderful. Sorry, Jim, we couldn't figure that out. We're new to GoToWebinar, but I'm excuse me, happy to speak on behalf of MED this morning and on behalf of Jim. So hi to everyone. On behalf of the Marijuana Enforcement Division, just want to extend our thank you to the Department of Regulatory Agencies, Executive Director Salazar, and Rebecca, to you especially for all your work to put this amazing morning together. So we're so grateful to be invited to co-host. This is such an important topic, and we throw our full support behind it. So with the Governor's Office leadership, we are prioritizing efforts to increase and enhance social equity and sustainability in the cannabis industry. Importantly, why we're here today, we're closely partnering with DORA to support increased banking and insurance options for our licensees and the cannabis sector as a whole. The value of access to banking and capital for cannabis businesses with services and support that we largely take for granted in most other sectors of the economy cannot be overstated. And we need to acknowledge that the access to banking services supports our efforts to address social equity and sustainability. Removing these existing barriers for marijuana businesses to bank with regulated financial institutions will help our licensees operate efficiently and enhance their compliance. And access to a full suite of financial services makes the industry safer. It's no secret that from the perspective of a state regulatory agency, providing an entrepreneurial and fast-growing industry access to safe, secure, and federally regulated banking will strengthen our state-level marijuana regulatory framework. Colorado's marijuana industry, talking about adult use and medical sales by our licensees, is on track this year for sales approaching $2.5 billion, which is an astronomical number. These financial transactions and activities involving ancillary businesses need support from banking institutions in the banking system. This enhanced access yields transparency and efficiency. It reduces the necessity for the same levels of cash in the system, and by extension, reduces the opportunities for crime associated with any cash-intensive industry. While we acknowledge that a permanent long-term banking solution for the marijuana industry will need some measure of federal action, we are eager to continue our engagement and dialogue with our federal partners to create pathways that strengthen our state's regulatory and compliance systems and protect public safety. Finally, we think it's important whenever we are able to gather together with such a distinguished and diverse group like this today to emphasize that we are engaged in a concerted effort to support our licensees and businesses, and especially to support opportunities to increase the number of women and minorities in Colorado's cannabis industry. And we certainly provide a special welcome to each and every one of you today. So if we are so excited to see the level of interest today, given the number of RSVPs that DOOR received. So if that's any indication of our resolve and determination to make progress, we should have confidence that we're going to make continued progress together. So I believe I'll hand it over to you, Rebecca, since we went out of order a little bit. And again, thank you for sticking with us for our technical difficulties, and we really look forward to hearing some from all the distinguished speakers today. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon and Jim. You can go ahead and save yourself and close your camera and turn yourself on mute. I think there was one point where we likened planning this as like a wedding outdoors, knowing full well that it could rain with plenty of technical issues. So that just seems par for the course, and we appreciate everybody's understanding and flexibility with that. Okay, next we have a special guest. Ian, go ahead and pop back on and do the introduction.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to everybody who's spoken thus far. Everyone, I am pleased to let you know that Colin Annenson is joining us today. Been working with Colin since I started here at Governor Polis' office, and it's been just such a delight to have somebody who understands what's going on at the federal level. Colin is a senior legislative assistant to Congressman Ed Perlmutter, our hero, the lead sponsor of the Safe Banking Act. He advises the Congressman on financial services, housing, small business, tax, and trade policy. Colin holds a BA in political science from the University of Colorado at Boulder and an MBA with a specialization in finance, also from the University of Colorado at Denver. A Colorado guy through and through. Thank you so much for joining us, Colin.
Thanks, Ian. And can you guys hear me?
All good.
Perfect. Thanks, Ian. I'm very excited to be here this morning because it has been a historic Congress for cannabis legalization. But I have to acknowledge we still have a lot of work to do. And I also want to acknowledge all of the great work our state government partners in the governor's office in Dora and Med and all throughout our state government have been doing to help with this issue in the absence of federal action. So there's two bills I want to talk about today. The first is the Safe Banking Act that my boss, Congressman Perlmutter, has been introducing every Congress for the last 8 years. So this bill is a narrow financial services cannabis banking bill that would allow state-regulated cannabis businesses to access the financial system by aligning federal law with state cannabis laws. Specifically, the Safe Banking Act would protect financial institutions who provide services to cannabis businesses and their service providers. And in this bill, financial institutions is extended to banks, credit unions, and insurance companies. So we're trying to cover all of our bases here to make sure that cannabis businesses are treated fairly and can actually access all financial services. The bill would also apply the same protections to banks, credit unions, insurers that are working with hemp businesses, as we still have issues for many hemp and CBD companies that, although hemp was legalized in the Farm Bill years ago now, they're still having issues with accessing the financial system. So the bill would also address that issue on top of cannabis banking generally. The purpose of this bill, I think Shannon did a really good job covering this. It's about public safety, about getting cash off of the streets, about allowing our businesses to facilitate transactions in forms other than cash. We've really seen through the last, since legalization, we've really seen, some bad stories about how forcing these businesses to operate in all cash has made them targets for robberies or burglaries and that sorts of thing. Additionally, I think that Shannon's absolutely right that increasing financial services access for cannabis businesses opens the door to better social equity, diversity, and inclusion in the business. And our bill has a little bit of an emphasis on that too, and would require some specific reporting on the industry as well. Also important to note that this bill does not require banks or credit unions or insurers to serve cannabis companies, but would protect those that do. So if a bank or credit union doesn't want to do business with a cannabis company, they don't have to. But we have heard from a number of banks and credit unions and insurers that want to do this business, but simply cannot because while it's federally illegal and they are federally regulated, they just can't get into this space. So we do think that this would really open the doors for a wide breadth of financial services to cannabis-related companies. So next, I want to talk about kind of the growth of this bill over the last 8 years. When we first introduced this, we had a handful of supporters, but over the last 8 years, we've grown the bill to 206 co-sponsors in the House, and more than 1/3 of the Senate are now co-sponsors. And after 6 years of nothing happening on the bill, this Congress, we were able to get a very successful hearing in the Financial Services Committee. We passed the bill in committee on a bipartisan basis, 45-15. And finally, in September of 2019, we passed the bill by 321 to 103. So 75% of the House voted in support of this. That's 229 Democrats, 91 Republicans. It was a huge vote and showed that cannabis banking legislation is bipartisan, and we have a huge number of members of Congress that want to see this become law. Unfortunately, in the Senate, while they did hold a hearing in the Senate Banking Committee, the bill has not advanced much farther there. Additionally, this year during the pandemic, we saw cannabis workers in Colorado becoming frontline workers and going to work in person every day, and yet still being forced to deal in all cash. And while many small businesses throughout the country were moving to more digital transactions to facilitate better social distancing, for many cannabis businesses, that was not an option, which was not fair to the employees, wasn't fair to the business. And so in the HEROES Act, the large package that was passed out of the House first in May of this year addressing the pandemic and COVID relief, the Safe Banking Act was included as well. So it was included in that version, and then when the House passed it again in October in an updated version, it was included in the updated version as well. So it's passed the House 3 times now. Unfortunately, we just have not been able to get the Senate to take it up and pass it as well. But we still have a lot of support, and I think we have a lot to be proud of. But I think next year we should be able to make even more progress with it. The next bill I want to mention is HR 3884, or the MORE Act, and this is the comprehensive bill that would legalize cannabis federally by removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act and create a regulatory framework to regulate cannabis, like similar to how alcohol is. And it contains a number of provisions focused on criminal justice reform, and it would open the door for small business lending through the SBA, and is just a very comprehensive bill. Notably, though, for states that cannabis is still illegal, cannabis would remain illegal in those states that have chosen not to, follow Colorado's lead in legalizing. So this bill has now also passed to the House. It passed in December, and it passed by a vote of 228 to 164. So 222 Democrats voted for this, with 5 Republicans and 1 independent supporting. So again, we're seeing on this issue of broader reform and really across the table in kind of improvements to federal cannabis laws, which would address basically everything. This bill still was able to move through the House. I think we still have some more work to do on our support for it, but it was a huge step forward and a huge vote for us. So those are the 2 bills I wanted to just raise that would have a really significant impact, and hopefully we can convince our Senate colleagues to come to the table and work out a deal. We would love to see some further reforms and finally resolve the banking issue for cannabis-related businesses. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Colin. Really appreciate your time today. That was really informative. I see that we are getting questions in related to some of the legislation. And what we'll do is follow up with Colin on some of these questions after the town hall today. We are now running a little bit behind, so we want to go ahead and move forward in the agenda. But do be sure that we are keeping track of the questions, and we will be sending out a notification to all the attendees about any kind of follow-up questions that are needed. So thank you so much, Colin. All right. For our first segment, we wanted to take a look at economic development and the cannabis industry. And so today we have Reed Ehrenstein with OEdit to give us a high-level look at what's happening across the state. You know, one of the consistent points that we hear from the industry, from the cannabis industry, is the difficulties they have accessing capital. And so we also invited Michael Turner with the Colorado Energy Office, who's going to share with you a program that offers some alternatives that could, potentially serve as an alternative to lack of access to capital. So Reed, go ahead and turn on your camera and unmute yourself. We'll get your presentation started here.
Right, can you see and hear me?
Yes, all good. Ready to launch.
Perfect. Great. Well, first of all, as others have done, I just want to say thank you to Rebecca and Dora for putting this together and for including OEdit. I think it's just great to have all these key stakeholders in the industry on the call. I think I think it's great to align everyone, and I think it speaks to really the engagement and collaboration that I think has made Colorado so successful. But just to introduce myself, I'm Reed Ehrenstein. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm a global business development manager at the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. Our office sits within the governor's office, and in my role, I oversee industry development for about 14 different industries, food and agriculture being one of those. And I primarily work with Colorado communities to codify economic development plans within the state's larger strategy, but then also work with foreign and domestic companies who are interested in expanding and relocating to Colorado. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the cannabis market in Colorado today, as well as some broad economic information about Colorado's competitive advantage within both the cannabis industry and more broadly. So Rebecca, it'd be great if you could go to slide 4, I think. Perfect. So just to give you a brief snapshot, just one slide back. Yeah, perfect. Just a brief snapshot of the Colorado regulated marijuana market. I think much of our success here can be attributed to consistent first mover advantage. So, we were the 6th to decriminalize marijuana in 1975, 6th to legalize it, medical marijuana in 2000, and the first to legalize recreationally in 2012. And those legislative actions, I think, have propelled our marijuana market to be one of the most robust and competitive in the country. And as you can see, over the past 6 years, year over year, sales have increased by about 16% annually, with sales at the end of 2019 totaling about $1.75 billion. Of that $1.75 billion, the top 50 marijuana companies in the state have about a little over 50% of market share. We see that consolidation sort of as a key indicator of Colorado reaching market maturity in the regulated marijuana space. In addition to that consolidation, another factor pointing towards market maturity is the price equilibrium that we appear to be reaching over the last year or so, with supply and demand sort of stabilizing price fluctuations. Next slide. On the hemp side of the cannabis industry, it's significantly more nascent, as everyone knows, than the marijuana side, but I think we all view it as having significant upside potential, potentially even more than the marijuana side, just because of the vast variety of applications that hemp has in such a wide array of industry verticals. As Wonderad and others have mentioned, Colorado is really a leader in hemp cultivation and production over the last several years. In 2020, Colorado has the highest number of hemp acres, licensed hemp acres under cultivation. And in 2019, the state's active registrants and acres under cultivation peaked at over 2,500 registrants and 87,000 acres under cultivation. And while acreage has dropped this year due to some of the regulatory uncertainty that people have mentioned, the pandemic, and what was probably an oversupply relative to the maturity of the supply chain domestically, I think we still think under CHAMP and given the industry partnerships that we're forging across the state, there is significant upside potential for Colorado to make some really substantial leaps in the industry in the coming years. The next slide. And then finally, in terms of OEDIT's strategy and further building out industry density, I think our efforts can really be bucketed into 5 sequential areas. The first being identifying some of those regulatory constraints that are barriers to entry or further investment in the industry, identifying knowledge or industry gaps within the supply and value chains in the industry, educating stakeholders about the resources available at the state, in the private sector, and at the local level to help support industry expansion and investment, evaluating our existing and future tools in the legislature that are at our disposal to help support industry development and investment, and then finally supporting local economic development planning and codifying it within the state's conservation and stewardship initiatives as well. So I know I'm tight on time, so I think the rest of this I'll just buzz through pretty quickly, but outside of the cannabis industry specifically, our strategy and industry development efforts at OEDIT continue to be supporting and promoting the competitive advantages that Colorado has across not just our food and agriculture sector, but across almost all of our industry verticals. And to name a few of those pillars, the first one is our competitive advantage in workforce and talent. We're a highly educated state, second most highly educated state behind Massachusetts. We also have a lot of proficiency in STEM related fields with about 1.4 times the density of STEM occupations in comparison to other states throughout the U.S. Our diversified and vibrant economy was a buoy for us through the 2008 recession, and I think has helped us be a resilient economy through the current pandemic and economic crisis, and I think will help us over the coming years and months as the pandemic continues to unfold. Additionally, just the inherent business advantages of doing business in Colorado. So our centrality in the contiguous United States, as well as our accessibility through the Denver International Airport and other airports to markets throughout the country and world, make Colorado a really compelling place to do business. Really vibrant startup ecosystem, collaborative environment between industry, academia, and government, and then our low-cost environment in terms of taxes, average wages, and travel are also compelling. And then finally, this is one of the later slides. At the state, always financial support mechanisms are a key in supporting industry development. Earlier this week, we were really pleased to announce that using one of our main job creation statutory incentive programs, the Job Growth Incentive Tax Credit, we were able to support our first marijuana company using that program called Slang Worldwide, who selected Colorado to continue their expansion in our state as opposed to other states that were under evaluation. And so we're really pleased to start using some of our state tools at our disposal today that we use for our other industries to start supporting the cannabis industry. And depending on the company or the investment opportunity, there's a number of state programs that are likely applicable. Of course, all of this is nested in a global business development strategy. For any questions on investment opportunities, how OEDIT can support, please feel free to contact me. On the last slide, I think there's my contact information. So again, thank you for inviting me, Rebecca, and thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Reed. Apologies if there was the lag there in getting you through the end of the slide, but we're going to be sharing the slides, and so people can be able to have access to it then, and great job. I really appreciate it. You can go ahead and turn off your camera and unmute yourself, and Michael with the Colorado Energy Office, go ahead and come online, and we will get you to the front of your presentation. And I think it should load right just about now.
I can see it. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and we can see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and a pleasure to talk to everyone briefly this morning about what the Colorado Energy Office is doing in this space, particularly with technical support, identifying cost savings for cultivation operations, and then some of the work that we've been doing to break open some alternative financing and really prioritizing that for the next year here at the Energy Office. So just wanted to give a high-level overview of what we launched last year, which is the Colorado Cultivators Energy Management Pilot Program. And really, if you could go to the next slide. So this pilot program was predicated on a 2018 market study of the cannabis industry in the state of Colorado, really recognizing that, that the energy use within the sector is extraordinarily high, and that there are extraordinary opportunities in which to reduce energy costs. Coupled with the, I think, change in the industry, it's becoming a lot more competitive. Wholesale prices have decreased significantly over the last 6 years. And so we're working with cannabis growers and utilities to identify what are the energy efficiency savings opportunities and the opportunity for renewable energy development on site. And so this market study really helped inform our strategy of addressing the key barriers, one being that the access to technical resources, to the energy audits, and then really breaking down, great, you have that information, you've identified ways to reduce your operating costs by 20, 30, 40%, depending on the measures. Then what? How do you work with your utility to actually get some of those projects implemented and actually achieve some of those cost savings? Next slide, please. So the program, yeah, if we could go back one.
Oops, sorry about that.
You're good. What we did is we partnered directly with the rural utility co-ops, co-op utilities, and had the program offered through the utilities. And this was a great way to, I think, foster greater connection. It was a great way for us to work with utilities that don't necessarily have a dedicated cannabis program, like some of the investor-owned utilities, Black Hills, Xcel Energy, who offer audit programs, offer prescriptive incentives through their commercial programs. And so we really wanted to dedicate this program to a lot of the rural grow operations that don't have the same access to this technical and financial support and some of those rebates for these programs. We conducted 15 energy efficiency audits, 15 renewable energy on-site assessments. And again, we worked in partnership with these utilities so that they can expand the reach of their efficiency programs, expand the reach to the cultivators in their territory, and expand the rebates and program offerings and technical and financial support to those businesses. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a high level of some of the really kind of big energy efficiency measures identified through our program. I think there's a lot more information coming out about best practices for how to achieve energy efficiency projects, how to reduce your operating costs through the investment, and our energy audits really identified, what it would take, what the payback on some of these efficiency measures are, which are extremely attractive. And I think it gives you a much better idea of how to reduce your operating costs. Next slide, please. And then lastly, looking at what are the renewable energy opportunities. We looked at solar, wind, geothermal.
I'm sorry, it just went a little crazy there. Are we here or this? Nope, back one.
Yep. And combined heat and power are the four opportunities that we identified. So at this stage, we're continuing to work with the co-op utilities, tri-state generation and transmission, again, to expand the reach of these technical resources. But as I said before, a big part of this is really how do you unlock the financing for this? A lot of these can be self-paid for, but those rebates, those incentives really go a long way in making the return on investment of these projects that much more attractive. We also are having conversations with the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, local lenders, in really, I think, using this information to demonstrate the value of having attractive alternative financing to actually pay for these projects, and why that's a good strategic investment on their part. So we're looking for more partners. We're really looking to focus on both the technical and financial resources for the industry in this coming year. And with that, I will hand it back over and appreciate everyone's time and look forward to a good conversation and questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate it.
I'm not sure. This is Ian. I'm not sure what's gone on or if anybody can hear me in the chat window, but we may have lost Rebecca for a moment. So if you bear with us for 1 minute, we will we'll get this restored here quickly. And if you could let me know in the chat if you can hear me or not, so that I know that I'm not speaking to myself, that would be helpful too.
You are clear, and I can hear you, Ian.
Can you hear me and see me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. Plain white screen.
Oh, how curious. Okay. Well, it's okay as long as you can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and just finish up and head into segment 1 here. I will ask that the panelists will go ahead and start their cameras and put themselves, select unmute for themselves, so we can go ahead and get those introductions started. The other thing is we are scheduled to have a Q&A right after this, but as I had mentioned, we're running just a little bit behind. So we see that there's some really good questions that have come in so far for Reed and Michael, and I know that there will be more. If we can only get to one just because of time, my apologies, but like I said, we will follow up doing an FAQ, and looks like, oh, thank you. I'm back. Appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and do an FAQ with following up on some of the really good questions that we're receiving so far. So first I want to welcome Steve Josephic. He's the Deputy Director of the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, as well as Dan Ramsey and Kate Ramsey with Natural Order Supply and Here for Hemp, located on the Western Slope as well. And Sherrard Martian Rogers with Roll Up Dispensary. And then we have our segment 1 speakers joining us as well. Though I'm not seeing Michael and Reed on, that's okay. Go ahead and join when you can. So thank you so much for joining us. You know, this is really unprecedented times, as we all well know. And really want to start with Steve, Kate, and Dan. This question is for you. Can you provide just a brief idea about the benefits and challenges of what you're seeing at the local level happening with the cannabis industries in your community and along the Western Slope as it relates to supporting economic development and then, of course, this past year, economic recovery?
Sure, I'd be happy to jump in and start with that. Thanks for the invitation. And I know the Grand Junction Mesa County area is not an exact representation of the Western Slope, but I'll do my best to cover most of the locations. But I really think that the hemp and cannabis industry came into our region at the perfect time. I think that diversification in industries is key right now. So one of the biggest benefits is that in much of the Western Slope, diversification of industries has really been helping to get us through this pandemic and increase revenues and increase jobs in the area. It really helped to negate the losses that we've seen in other industries. Primarily, what we're speaking about now is the hemp and cannabis industries have really been helping to negate the losses that we've seen from the energy industry that we've been heavily dependent upon on the Western Slope. So I think that's just been a really good bright spot with everything else that's going on right now. There's definitely some challenges. Financial support is going to be at the top of the list, but it sounds like there's some good bills that are coming down the pipeline. So hopefully they can help to turn some things around. But I just think that opportunity for this industry, there's still room to see it grow in the area. We just have lots of land in the area, lots of facilities for processing, drying, storage, for retail. So I still think that the market, especially on the Western Slope, is not even close to being tapped. And with some of these bills passing, we could really see an extra boost in our economy and most of the towns throughout the area.
Thank you, Steve. That's a really good summary. And I know that a lot of us are kind of waiting with bated breath on some of that federal legislation. Kate and Dan, thank you so much for being here. I know that you are busy business owners, and in addition to that, you have put together a very strong coalition that is called Here for Hemp, that encompasses a lot of the different counties and the hemp growers, producers, retailers in the area. So I'm curious, why was it important to you to put together this particular group, and how do you think that has affected economic development locally?
You know, the reason why we did it is actually kind of a springboard from our other business, which is Natural Order Supply, which does cultivation supplies and agricultural supplies for farmers, and it's located in Grand Junction, Colorado. And we started that in 2015, and Grand Junction got a pretty big surge of hemp business in the last few years, and all the challenges and opportunities that brought into our storefront made us realize we needed another venue to be able to address all of the things that come with being a hemp farmer, whether it's diving into the genetics or the controlled environments, which we do a lot in the storefront. As soon as we got into business development and trying to talk about a lot of the issues that are being brought up today, we realized we just needed another platform where we could both showcase the businesses that were popping up in our area and highlight some of the issues that were problems that we were finding solutions to, or just even keeping the dialogue going. Like today, seeing this group of people come together and talk about this is great, because as people who organize events, in 2020, it's easier said than done. We had a lot of really good momentum through all of last year and into this year with our in-person events and speakers. And then since 2020, it's changed a little bit. But the reason why we started that was really just to bring people together. We also realized a lot of the numbers that were mentioned earlier, that Colorado has one of the strengths we have is a strength in numbers. And so bringing people together, when out here, on the western slope or in Colorado and more rural areas, sometimes it's hard to know who your allies are. And so getting them together for conversations was a big part of Here for Hemp. And, we've been able to, since 2015, work with a little over 400 different farms, and just hearing some of the ways, the struggles they've gone through and being able to bring it together. That's kind of why we did it.
How it kind of started was an idea. We had business cards, and we had this platform where people could post their information, and we ended up doing a lot of matchmaking, if you will, to help provide a service for our client that was looking for a particular item. So, we decided, well, let's take this a little bit bigger so that we can make education and information more accessible to larger groups at a given point. For those of you not familiar with cultivation store culture, if you will, we're very close to our clients. We know their families, we know what's going on with them. So we have very informal conversations with these individuals and businesses. And that really allowed us to have a huge amount of insight into where these challenges were, and allowed us to have larger conversations with, whether it be ancillary businesses or financial institutions or state regulators, groups, that Steve leads here locally. It's allowed for us to make some good headway locally to help establish this emerging market and try to help stabilize it, because any new business has tremendous challenges in front of it, whether it's a lack of financial backing or a lack of agricultural experience. To be frank, we see a lot of businesses that have one or the other, but it's more rare to see businesses that have both. And so we are trying to bridge that gap for our customers so that their businesses could be successful and we could maintain a stronger base here locally and statewide. So, that was kind of our founding philosophies here. As Dan mentioned, it has been challenging over this past year to keep that in-person momentum, since, the pandemic has really taken a hit on that. And so many of the farmers really are in-person people. Engaging in the webinars is sometimes more challenging just due to time constraints or technological disinterest, but we're really excited about this event and the interest that's been showed in the various parties that have been able to attend and speak so far.
Fantastic. Well, we really appreciate you being here today, and wish you the best of luck with everything that's going on. And if there's any questions that come through, we'll go ahead and call you out for those. I do want to move on to Sherrod Rogers. Sherrod, you're quite unique in this industry in that you started out working in banking and finance and then switched over to cannabis. And now that you're the owner of Roll Up Dispensary as well as other businesses, I'm wondering, given the year we've had and the economic conditions at the local level that we know is happening, what are you experiencing right now as a business owner and an active member of the cannabis industry in terms of the types of access to financial services, economic support and recovery support, and access to capital?
Well, there's, unless you have outside sources and grassroots sources in order to obtain capital, it's slim pickings. Coming from the financial services background, special thanks to the governor's office and state and local government for allowing us to stay open so we can keep our staff employed so they can spend their dollars within the Colorado marketplace. It's very discouraging to see side by side as I have, I'm a franchisee in a coffee business with 13 stores and opening 4 next year, in comparison to operating a cannabis business and the government support that I'm getting on the coffee side, and the only support I'm getting on the federal level is zero, but on the state and local level, we're getting support by as much as they can, meaning keeping our businesses open. So special thanks to them, but it is truly a tough industry to operate in with the federal resistance to help us, i.e. banking and various other opportunities. Banking is a great way to manage cash flow, also from an audit standpoint. So I was able to receive a cannabis account from Gunnison, which has been extremely supportive. However, looking at my other businesses and all the other banking options I have, i.e. loans, PPP, and various other options, if we have that same support with the effect that we have on the GDP with state and local, just imagine what we could do. Everyone that's on this platform today are just phenomenal business owners and also advocates for cannabis. However, we're still compared to the illegal activity of other, drug, i.e., cannabis not being legal. So with that being said, if anyone on this line has been through a financial suitability process, i.e. the background checks, the review of tax returns, bank accounts, criminal record, it's worse than getting a Series 6 and 63, which I did receive at a large retail bank. But once again, it's very, very difficult to operate in the cannabis business. But however, special thanks to the governor's office and state and local offices for allowing us to be open and allowing us to employ our employees. If we had other banking options available, then it wouldn't be so difficult to find a lease on a building, because the lease owner would say, hey, we can't rent to you because our bank won't allow us to rent to cannabis owners. Or our employees who want to buy homes, and we work through credit programs and various other things, can purchase homes and have other options available to them. So just keep plugging away, and our state representatives keep fighting for us, because there is a dire need to have financial services to help grow our businesses, because we are true American business owners who are entrepreneurs and want to be treated so.
Thank you, Sherrod. Very good points. Right now we do want to take a couple of questions. I understand that we're a little bit behind. We do want to transition into the next segment fairly quickly. So we'll go ahead and take one question. And Courtney Roberts has been monitoring the questions. I've also had a chance to go in and answer a few. So Courtney, I'm wondering, related to this particular segment, is there a question that has come through that that you think would be really appropriate for one or more folks on the panel to be able to answer?
Let's see, sure. We have one that came in for Sherrod. It says, how do your cannabis businesses function versus your other businesses, right? Tax compliance and audit defense. What are the differences?
From an audit standpoint, and working for a large retail bank, the cannabis business is more stringent. And from a tax compliance standpoint, the cannabis business is overregulated. We don't get the same amount of deductions. So if you're not vertically integrated, meaning going from seed to sale, you don't have the ability to spread some of those tax liabilities off on the dispensary side. So therefore, you're paying the highest tax rate, so your margins are lean. In comparison to my other business, we're up 16.6% in a COVID environment. if we had the same balanced effect with the same ability to deduct our expenses, just like a normal business tax-paying owner does, then we would thrive more. We could hire more employees, which is a greater economic impact to our communities and so forth. We just want a fair shot at doing good business.
That's a really good point, Sherrod. There are several questions in here bringing up the point about taxes, tax exemptions, the sentiments of feeling like there's a punitive nature in the tax structure right now. And that's something that we'll take a look at when we compile that FAQ that we'll send out to the attendees today. So everyone, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we didn't have time for more questions. It seems like that's just kind of life right now. And we'll go ahead and compile the questions that do come in and forward those to you, and also get it out to the attendees. So thanks so much. You can go ahead and turn off your cameras and mute yourself, and we'll head into our next segment. And Sherrod, it looks like you're still.
I'm sorry, I'm getting critiqued by my wife.
You're all good. You're all good.
Thank you.
So right now, hopefully everyone can see my screen. And just a reminder that we are monitoring that questions box area. That's how we're getting your questions. We're getting really, really good questions, and really appreciate your attention to it. As we transition here into segment 2, what I would like to do is just take a moment to quickly introduce our segment 2 speakers. That's Kenneth Bolt, who is the State Bank Commissioner, and Financial Services Commissioner Mark Valente. Ken will introduce the Gunnison Bank and Trust Company President and CEO, Ashley Burt, and Mark will introduce Partner Credit Union and Safe Harbor Services CEO, Sunday Seafried. So Ken and Ashley, please go ahead and turn on your cameras and unmute your microphones.
Well, good morning, everybody. You can hear me all right?
Yep. You're welcome.
Thank you. My name is Ken Bolt. As Rebecca said, I'm the Bank Commissioner. And for those of you that may not be familiar with the Division of Banking, what our responsibilities are, we are the regulator for state chartered banks and state chartered trust companies. And we're also the regulator for money transmitters that want to do business here in the state of Colorado. And finally, our other big area is we're the administrator of the Public Deposit Protection Act. So to kind of give you a little bit of a landscape of the banking world in Colorado, at June 30th every year, the FDIC publishes a report of deposits and locations by state. And as of June 30th of this year, there were 129 banks that had at least one location in Colorado and operating here. Of that 129, 53 of those are regulated by the Division of Banking. So that kind of gives you our scope of responsibilities. But you really didn't come here to listen to me talk about the Division of Banking. What I'd really like to do is introduce Ashley Burt, who is President and CEO of the Gunnison Bank and Trust in Gunnison, Colorado. Ashley has been with the bank for over 24 years and has served as president for 16 of those years. He splits his time between the main location in Gunnison, the branch in Crested Butte, and the loan production office in the Denver Tech Center. Ashley also serves on the board of directors of the Kansas City Federal Reserve branch in Denver. And prior to joining that organization, he was a member of the Colorado State Banking Board, which we appreciated. He was a member of the Independent Bankers of Colorado, and was also past chairman of the Colorado College Invest, the state's 529 board. So Ashley, thank you for joining us, and thanks everybody for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. So I've been asked to give a brief overview today of why we chose to bank it, why the fees are so high, and what challenges we faced in this space. So starting with why we chose to bank it, there are a couple of different reasons. our participation in this space dates to 2009, and obviously that was medical only, but that's when we developed our first reason, and it was really our community. We knew at that point that it was coming to the Gunnison Valley, that we were going to have medical dispensaries. We knew they were going to generate cash, and we knew they had no place to put that cash. So our assumption was it was going to be stockpiled, and that sounded like a recipe for crime to a lot of people. So, you know, community banks are saying we do this for the community, we do that for the community, but along came this opportunity where we really could take on some risks, stick our necks out a little bit, but do something truly meaningful for the community and get the cash off the streets. So we decided we should do our part, and we started becoming involved at that point. Moved forward to 2014, and the stakes got a lot higher. There was a lot more activity, and it was scrutinized a lot closer. And we developed our second reason, which was related to the first, but on a broader scale. And that broader scale was sort of the state and possibly the nation. And I can summarize it by saying we felt it was reasonable to be suspicious of this new industry. This was an industry that had in the past been used to fund organized crime. And so we saw a very strong reason to regulate it and make sure that it was operated by legitimate businesses. And good regulation generally requires banking. Regardless of what you think about legalization, one of the objectives was to take away the revenue stream from organized crime and give that revenue stream to legitimate small business and the people of Colorado. And we realized that we could actually play a critical role in doing this, and had to face the question, were we going to help this effort, or were we going to further hinder this effort? And we decided it was a valid effort, and we were going to help it. We had the ability to remove funding from organized crime, to ensure that taxes were paid, to control money laundering, and to bring revenue in the front door and shine a bright light on it. Transparency for the industry, we felt, would limit bad players and make it safe and make it regulated. So moving on to why the fees are so high. Believe it or not, I get this question a fair amount. And the first thing I'd say is we are gouging the industry. Let me start by explaining that we look at this risk in two buckets. There was the legal risk, the threat of criminal prosecution, and then there was the compliance risk. And I think there were a lot of people that assumed we charged a risk premium for the legal risk, and that was not the case. Early on in this process, legal risk was what we spent our time on. It was the most obvious risk. And compliance programs at that point weren't too demanding, and consequently fees were very low. You know, we were close to normal banking back then. But over time, this situation shifted, and I'll explain why in a moment. But we were able to come to terms with the legal risk due in large part to the Cole memo, statements from the DOJ, the FinCEN memo, statements from the Colorado U.S. Attorney. We were able to wrap our heads around that risk and say, we find this to be a very small risk, an acceptable risk. However, at the same time, the regulatory requirements became much more intense. And therefore, they took a lot more people, and they cost us a lot more money. We have a 4-person full-time department that does nothing but track transactions through these accounts. So you can imagine what that costs, and that's just a piece of it. So finally, to what challenges we've faced. One of the biggest challenges we have faced might surprise folks, but it's the fact that there is no banking regulation in this space. There is no banking regulation at the federal level. There is no banking regulation at the state level. It simply doesn't exist. There's a huge truck outside my window piling up snow. I don't know what that sounds like to you guys, but it's really loud in here, so I hope you can still hear me. So this lack of regulation, this vacuum of regulation, resulted in something we refer to as regulatory creep. There aren't these guideposts. There isn't this structure. And this isn't the fault of the regulators. This isn't the fault of the banks. It was simply the environment we found ourselves in. We found ourselves in an environment with very little guidance. And so what would happen is examiners in the field would go out to one bank, see practices they liked, and record that mentally and say, okay, these are the best practices. This is the best way to operate this component. they would then come back to our bank and say, hey, you guys aren't doing this. And we would say, well, we didn't know we should be doing this. They would then advise us that we should be doing this. And so we would accept these best practices and make these changes, but it was always reactive on our part. We could never be proactive and look at the bank regulation and say, this is what we're required to do. Let's make sure we do it in an efficient manner. Instead, it was sort of patching holes as best practices are uncovered from other institutions. So, that was not only a challenge for us, one that we've embraced and worked through, and, full transparency with your regulators, no matter who's regulating you, is absolutely crucial. But that was a challenge for us, but I think it's also one of the elements that has kept other banks out of this space. The uncertainty of what standards you're going to be held to in a space where the regulatory penalties are fairly stiff is a scary prospect. So there you have my 3 answers. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Well, go ahead and unmute yourself and or mute yourself and unshare your camera, and we'll go ahead and get Mark and Sunday on. Go ahead and share your camera and unmute yourself, Mark and Sunday.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Rebecca?
It is a little bit choppy on my end, but I don't know if that's just me.
Okay, then I will. Hopefully this is a little better. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. My name is Mark Valenti. I'm the commissioner for the Colorado Division of Financial Services. We at the Division of Financial Services regulate about $30 billion of assets for Colorado credit unions and savings and loan institutions. Colorado credit unions have really stepped up and assisted and helped bank the cannabis industry, both cannabis, both hemp and marijuana. And that really was the goal. That is really the goal of credit unions. When credit unions started in North America back in 1901, their main job for credit unions was to bank those that could not get banking through traditional means. And 100 years later, that still applies to the cannabis industry here in Colorado. As we said earlier, ultimately, the decision to service the cannabis industry is up to the individual credit union, but we at the Division of Financial Services, as the government regulator, our job is to ensure that Colorado state chartered credit unions remain healthy and strong. So next, I just want to introduce Sunday. Sunday Seafried is the CEO of Partner Colorado Credit Union and Safe Harbor Services. The credit union has been banking the cannabis industry since 2015 and now banks in excess of $250 million per month of cannabis-related funds. At the same time, they created a subsidiary of Safe Harbor Services, which provides aid to other financial institutions looking to implement the Safe Harbor program. So Sunday, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. Yeah, we started banking the business in 2015, and since then we've had great success and a lot of great cooperation from the cannabis industry and the hemp industry to actually be able to learn the industry and actually mitigate all the risks that are associated with that. We started the Safe Harbor Division under Partner Colorado Credit Union to segregate the business because it was a high-risk business for us, and we knew it was going to take special compliance. I have to say that without the support of state regulators at DORA, that we probably would not have realized the success in helping Colorado get banked to the extent we have. We actually, to date, have banked in excess of $8 billion in cannabis-related funds since we started. And in 2020, we will actually bank just over $3 billion in cannabis-related funds. So when you compare that to the market size, there's a good amount of Colorado that is already banked. The reason it may not marry up with the market size is because many of our operators in Colorado have been afforded the opportunity, once banked, to expand into other states, and they have become multi-state operators or just hold multiple licenses in different states. So they've realized a great deal of success. And we started out very carefully with depository services because you cannot bank what you don't understand. And so we had to learn the businesses, we had to learn the money, and we had to learn the ownership. The most important thing is ownership, especially when there's been a black market history from which cannabis was, coming out from. And as Ashley said, we need to be able to sort the good players from the bad players. And all I've ever heard from the industry is that they want to legitimize themselves as badly, and therefore they're willing to do the compliance work necessary. So I see now some of the banks trying to move into lending without depository services, and I would really caution against that because you have to know the money. You have to know the money is coming from legitimate businesses and properly reported, and no tax evasions going on. We ended up just launching a lending program this year, our first lending program. I know our clients have patiently waited for 6 years to get us into lending, but when you're dealing in a high-risk business that's federally illegal, you have to take one step at a time. Go right to the top. You got to learn the industry and the business, and then add services as you go along. So this year, we're pretty pleased to be able to say that we are now lending on commercial real estate to start, but obviously in the next couple of years, we hope to build on that with our known clients. So that's really important when you're asking, how do you get access to capital? You have to establish that bank account and relationship, and in the long run, then get access to additional services, because it takes some of the fear out of the fact they're dealing with an illegal market at the federal level. And there's a great deal of trust that allows us to move in that direction and offer more services like access to capital. I can say that, as the state develops additional programs involving social equity, we will stand front and center to assist any way we can in making that happen and helping the industry further gain access to that type of capital. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sundie. And, I do have a couple of slides uploaded here. Did you want to address those?
Sure.
So I have your annual cannabis-related deposits.
Yeah. So this is, when I say take a slow and methodical approach as you get into the banking sector, this is exactly how we grew the business. And I have to say, being a credit union in year one, when we only banked $153 million in cannabis funds, my board was not concerned about making a big profit. They were focused and concerned about being able to stay in business, bank the business with continuity, and actually do it in a safe and sound manner. So, breaking even was the objective and staying in business year one. So we grew the portfolio quite methodically. And as you can see, when 2018 and 2019 came along, we saw a huge influx of investment funds coming into the industry at that point in time. And that's what you see the growth. This is a lot of organic growth within the companies actually getting access to capital one way or another, most of the time having to trade out equity for investors, which is not the preferred way of a lot of companies. We, as you can see, will reach $3 billion this year, but as Ashley was speaking about the compliance level, we'll file 12,000 federal reports, and each of those has to be individually managed. They are not just cut and dry reports that come out of the system. Those are reports that have to be pertinent to law enforcement at the federal level and require analysis of each banker on each report each time they file one. So that compliance level is quite high. If we could switch to the next slide. I just wanted to point this out, the most recent statistics from FinCEN in terms of the decrease in the number of banks actually providing services. These statistics can be misleading in as much as many times banks go in, I know the industry has been very subject to this, banks go in and they clean out their portfolios and look for hidden accounts, and then they have to file SARs on the accounts they find and termination SARs on the accounts that they put out the door. But as I'm showing you this, I can tell you that in just this last year, we have assisted 4 financial institutions, all of them being credit unions this year, put up programs in different states. So I know that there is a bigger demand, and there are more financial institutions entering it very carefully and often drawing upon those of us who have got some experience in it to assist them in not misstepping and going in the wrong direction. So this is a misleading statistic. I actually think there are more entities banking the industry today than have ever been banking the industry. And they're seeing it as an opportunity, just as we did going into recession and now in recovery, and having it being an essential business allows us to continue to serve this thriving market and have a very active market share upon which we can rely. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Very good. And go ahead and keep your cameras on, please. We're going to head into the panel portion here. And if our other speakers could also turn on their cameras, as well as the panelists, what we'd like to do is spend some time talking about the challenges and opportunities serving cannabis businesses. Now, I do believe that a lot of questions have already come in related to this just since the speakers started, and I believe that there is a possibility we could answer quite a few of them just in the panel discussion. I do want to leave some time for questions, so we're going to keep the panel discussion fairly brief and then address a few of the questions that came in. So first, I just want to do quick introductions. We have Scott Earl, who is the president and CEO of Mountain West Credit Union Association, as well as John Povden with the Independent Bankers of Colorado, and Micah Schwab, who is adjunct faculty at CU Law, and he is a consultant with his own legal firm as well for financial institutions. And Jennifer Waller, the president of the Colorado Bankers Association. So along with our speakers, we welcome our panelists and thank you so much for joining us. Looks like everybody is on. First question right off the bat is to Jennifer, Scott, and John. So despite more and more states legalizing cannabis, there's still many financial institutions that won't accept cannabis business clients. And alternatively, in some of the surveys that we've taken, the issue that keeps coming up is that accounts are being dropped, high fees to maintain accounts are cumbersome, and then there's that issue in terms of access to capital. We saw a question that came in wondering how is it that some Colorado banks are willing to accept, cannabis cash and other banks are not. So from that perspective and understanding, the business needs of your members, I'm wondering what have banks and credit unions expressed to you as the main barriers for accepting cannabis clients?
Well, I can go ahead and dive in. I would say there's three main barriers, and one is the federal law. Clearly, that's a challenge, and some banks are not willing to cross that line until something changes federally. You also have the issue of federal regulation and compliance, and those two really go hand in hand. You have the situation where a federal regulator or a state regulator may deem a financial institution's internal compliance program is insufficient to identify fraud or mitigate risk for that institution, and therefore that financial institution is required to close those accounts. We've seen that more often in banks that are just banking a handful of accounts because they haven't truly invested or gone all in to serve the entire industry. They just had a few handful of accounts and oftentimes have had to close those. You also have the challenge of compliance, and I believe it was Ashley that brought this up, of compliance being very expensive and very time consuming. You'll have cases of customers not wanting to fully comply with all the requirements a bank may have, and therefore the account has to be closed. And as Ashley had said previously, that compliance and expertise to serve the industry is very expensive and is passed on to the customers.
Thank you. How about Scott and John?
Well, what I would, to add on what Jennifer said, I think banking is an intersection between federal policy and state policy, and the CHAMP initiative and these efforts that the state of Colorado is putting forth is obviously a leading effort on cannabis policy at the state level. We also heard from Colin, from Representative Perlmutter's office about the federal efforts, and I think it's important important to understand that the federal regulators are sort of, they're not going to discourage or encourage. They're going to say that the bank has to make, and the state regulators say the same thing. The bank has to make, or the credit union has to make its own business decision, whether they're going to enter into this. And I think ultimately, whether a bank does it, it's up to the board members of that particular bank or credit union to make a decision on whether they're going to get into this line of business. As Ashley pointed out, there is some legal risk from federal criminal statutes and the Bank Secrecy Act, but there's regulatory risk, which is more of kind of an amorphous concept as far as what are the hurdles that you have to hit. We heard from Ashley and Sunday on some of those requirements, but they evolve over time. And I think that's one, and you have the legal risk, and then you have the regulatory risk, and some banks have to decide that they're going to enter into that. The good news is that 500 banks and 185 credit unions, give or take a few, have entered into this and are doing this, have decided to take the prosecutorial discretion aspect of what federal prosecutors might do or not do. The good news, I would say, is that I think that the highest risk time period for the industry was when Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General of the United States. He was Senator Jeff Sessions from Alabama, and when he became the Attorney General, the first speech he gave was about marijuana, and he didn't like that very much. We're long past that. We're about to get a new Attorney General, and I think that the legal risk is coming down. And honestly, I think if the Moores Act can be passed, I think that would be the greatest thing that could happen to this industry.
Thank you, John. Scott?
I'll just tack on to what both Jennifer and John have said. I agree completely. The thing that you need to remember about the banking industry in general, credit unions and banks, is that we're a risk-averse industry. So whenever we're met with risk, we've got to find ways to deal with it. And I've watched Cindy Seyfried go through what she's needed to build the program that's in place today to make the difference that she's making. And that workload is just tremendous. And you want financial institutions to do it right so that the customers are not affected down the road. And so I consider Sunday and Ashley as well pioneers doing the things that need to be done. And I agree completely with John. We are going to see some changes in this coming legislative year, and hopefully those will be very positive for the industry.
Thank you. Micah, a question for you. What are you seeing taking place outside of Colorado? And do you have any overall suggestions or advice on ways cannabis businesses can have some more stability and perhaps a little bit more success at working with a financial institution?
Sure. So first, I would distinguish between hemp and cannabis, because I think that's going to be a critical line of demarcation for most financial institutions. In terms of getting services and retaining services, I'd say your state-regulated institutions are going to be your best bets, whether it's the community chartered banks or credit unions like Sunday's on either side of the equation. For hemp, I would say think about some of the kind of traditional agricultural lenders, whether it's the Rabobanks or even Farm Credit, and that's something that I think most folks forget. I mean, hemp is a crop. There is a source of credit for growing crops, and traditionally that's been Farm Credit. Beyond that, I would say know your banker or your institution, much like they're going to ask a lot of questions about you. Figure out who they are, figure out how they approach this, whether or not they have a mature program, kind of like what Ashley and Sunday's program looks like, and be fully transparent about what you're doing, regardless of what size of business you're involved in terms of your ownership, your corporate structure. If you have an internal compliance program yourself, that's always good to hand over and review with potential partner, a banking partner. And last but not least, have a backup, because more often than not, and I've seen this happen time and time again, even the most innocuous businesses that have the most tenuous tie to cannabis or hemp can oftentimes be, I wouldn't say frog marched, but pretty close to it, out the door of some of the much larger institutions that are not sensitive to some of the needs that have been discussed earlier. Getting to the first point, though, in terms of what I'm seeing in other states, it kind of corresponds with the extent of, I would say, the comfort level with cannabis or hemp in a given state. So Colorado, Washington, California, as you would expect, are probably ahead of the curve. Our neighbors to the east, perhaps less so, and also some of the other states that are just outright completely resistant to hemp or cannabis, like Idaho. Good luck.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things that we will be talking about in the next segment is that very conundrum with interstate agreements and a lot of the differences between from state to state, especially when it comes to insurance. But I do want to move on really quickly to a question that came in that I think applies to Sunday and Ashley, and then we'll move on for Courtney to go ahead and bring up some of the other questions. But this kind of aligns in the question that we were going to ask you to begin with, and that is about what the high-level requirements are for banks to work with cannabis companies. As we know, as Sunday had mentioned, SARs have gone up. So, you know, what's contributing to that, and then what are those high-level requirements for banks? And Sunday or Ashley can begin.
You know, I can summarize it with not a very flattering term. It's an invasive process. We want to know everything about it. We need to be able to track every dollar. You know, much like the industry tracks from seed to sale, we have to track from sale to, you know, the ultimate use of those proceeds. And so literally to be able to track every dollar, this includes investment dollars in, this includes revenues from the product, this includes reconciling it back to sales tax returns. There are a lot of questions, and unfortunately there are so many, it's tough to sometimes give a very succinct list up front and say this is all we need, because when you gather that information, it sometimes leads to additional questions. I think what's really important for the industry to understand, and in my defense and Sunday's defense, is we don't ask for this because we're curious or dying to know. We ask for this to defend your account. When we are examined and we are scrutinized, we must be able to defend every dollar in this account, where it came from and where it went. And if we can't do that, then we're doing you a disservice as your financial institution, because it will ultimately not end well. So we do it because we have to, but we do it for our customers and for their benefit.
Thank you, Ashley. Sunday, on that?
I have to just add on a little to what Ashley said, because it's true that, one of the tasks that banks and credit unions are tasked with is to make sure not one illicit dollar enters the American financial system. And that is what we're tasked with on a regular basis under bank secrecy obligation. So we have to understand those dollars, and that does take a lot of understanding and a lot of work on our bankers' part to make sure they understand the clients. And the other thing I would add is that, the onboarding process is pretty significant, and it's held to a higher due diligence than if you were just getting a normal business account. And we not only have to collect all the documentation we need to understand the business, but then we have to collect things like your taxes and your business plans and your application to the state. And we have to cross-reference them to look for consistency, to make sure nobody's slipping into the financial institution that will damage the entire program. I had somebody come to us last week, and they sat down and they said, we went to this other bank who's just starting to open hemp accounts, but they didn't know what hemp was. And they between hemp and cannabis. And so we weren't comfortable banking there. So the industry has learned that it's important for the financial institution to really understand the business to that extent, and they're not comfortable. And I think you might see more of that if you see the Safe Banking Act pass, is that people will try to jump in, overly normalize this when it's a high-risk business and nowhere near ready to go to a normalization status, and probably never will, because even liquor stores, alcohol stores, and other cash-intensive businesses and casinos, they are still not normalized banking nor normalized fee status.
That's a good point and a great segue into some of our questions, which, as you can imagine, a lot of them are based around some, the higher base fees, some of the stability of the accounts. So, Courtney, if you're on and listening, can you go ahead and turn on your camera, take yourself off mute, and let us know if there's some questions that have come through that we should go ahead and shoot out to our panel here.
Sure. So the first one is, why can state chartered banks accept the cash versus federal banks?
Well, that's not exactly true.
One of the main advantages.
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Cindy. No, you go ahead. I'm going to go on my high horse about the advantage of the state charter versus the federal charter. But you answer first.
Well, the state charters, we feel they're pretty close to us, and they actually understand what we're doing, and so they too were tied to the success of the state in getting banked and improving safety. So I think there's a factor there. But out of the 11 or 12 financial institutions that we've brought up on cannabis program, 3 of them are federal financial institutions and not state charters. So it can be done. There isn't the rules that surround banking cannabis are not difference between federal charters or state charters. It's just a matter of the cooperation level and transparency and trust you have with your regulators to get that job done. And to be honest, that education is extensive, and some financial institutions don't want to go through that process. Normally, just to give you an example, and Mark, don't take offense to this, but normally we would have an exam once a year. And in the last 5.5 years, we've been through 14 or 15 exams. That's a lot of education on the cutting edge to have to go through, but it should make it easier now for other financial institutions to get into it, whether they're state or federal.
And Mark,
absolutely. The idea of banking marijuana is new to us all. Sometimes as regulators, we pretend we know everything about the industry, but the idea of banking marijuana was new to us all. So I was learning just as Sunday was learning at the same time. So it's definitely a learning process. And back to the original question of, our federal counterpart, somebody said earlier, our federal counterpart is taking a neutral position on this. Now, 5 years ago when this first started, they were much more hesitant to the idea of banking marijuana. So that's definitely one of the advantages of the state charter is we provide that buffer between the federal government and the credit union. Sometimes it's not so tactfully, we remind the federal government that we are as a state chartered institution, we're the primary regulator at the Colorado Division of Financial Services. So ultimately, we have the final say of the regulatory operations of the credit union.
Rebecca, one thing that I would add to this is remember that banking is the intersection of federal and state policy. And for the federally chartered banks and credit unions, the state policies, as mentioned in Commissioner Salazar's roadmap, the Colorado roadmap, that is probably emphasized a lot more in the state of Colorado because of the state agencies and the policies that are trying to be advanced, including this webinar and the CHAMP initiative and some of these other activities, that they aren't quite as emphasized on the federal side. But as Sunday and Ashley pointed out, both federally chartered banks and credit unions can decide to offer these types of accounts. The guidance applies equally to both of them. But I think what you're seeing in the state chartered world is Colorado's policy to try to help these businesses thrive in the state. That's what I think is the key.
I agree entirely with John, and if I can just put a bow on this, we are at the Gunnison Bank and Trust. Our primary regulator is the Colorado Division of Banking, but because we are a Federal Reserve member bank, we are also examined by the Federal Reserve. And I can say there's really been no meaningful distinction between the standards that are applied or the examination process between the two with respect to banking cannabis.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. I believe it's really for the associations about fees here, Courtney.
Okay, will fees come down when banking is more regulated and standardized?
I mean, to me, the fees, we've heard a lot about the costs involved with inside the bank to meet the regulatory expectations of banking cannabis, including marijuana and hemp. I believe that if marijuana is legalized through the MORES Act and decriminalized, I think that you'll start to see a lower emphasis on some of this. It won't go away, as Sunday pointed out. There, alcohol business and other cash-intensive businesses, casinos have higher risk and they have higher obligations under the Bank Secrecy Act. But I think that would help. It also will help to have more institutions get involved. It's a supply and demand issue. I think that there will be price pressure down. The more institutions that get involved in this, there will be competition over what the fees are. And I think that the businesses will be able to pick and choose a little bit more about where they're going to bank.
Jennifer, you had a comment?
Yes, much of what I said was what John also said. I think as you see more banks enter it, it will become more competitive, and you will see the fees drop to the same level that a casino or a liquor store, another cash-intensive industry would have. I don't think you will see the fees ever drop to that of just a normal business, because there's always going to be some additional risk associated with this industry. It will tend to always be cash-intensive. So I don't think you'll see a true normalization of fees.
And
Can I just jump in on that?
As well, I was just going to defer to you, Sunday, because I think you've got a better handle on this than I do.
Well, thank you, Mr. Earl. So first of all, the good news for the industry is that Ashley and I were speaking the other day, and both of us are being shopped by cannabis organizations at this point in time. So that will tell you that the competition is out there and that fees are being considered in that process. But the second thing is there are institutions, fintechs, those types of organizations charging up to 2% coming in on deposits. Fees, I think you're going to definitely see start to get reduced in the next year, because we charge, and I can't speak for Ashley, but we would never charge that much to our cannabis businesses, and if we're getting shopped, then they're getting shopped, and it's going to boil down to fees. So pricing pressure is on right now, and we just because we've got time and experience in it, obviously we can become more efficient and we can meet those pricing pressures. But I'm not sure that those other business models that were built on 1.49% or 2% will actually be able to survive long term in this game unless they do start lowering prices.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I was just going to add that Sunday's exactly right there, and she cautions about the higher end of the fee spectrum. I want to just make a cautionary comment about the lower end of the fee spectrum. There are also institutions out there attempting to join in because they think they see a cash cow, but what they don't really understand is the amount of effort that goes in back of house to make this work. If you are a participant in this industry, the easiest path and the cheapest path may not be the best path for your business. Just be aware of that. You do want someone who's done it.
Very good point. Good point to end on. It is 11:55, so we are back on track and on time. We got so many questions that came in. So we are going to be compiling those questions and putting together an FAQ document. We will be sharing those questions to our panelists. So do continue to submit those questions through the Q&A box, and we'll go ahead and start the transition to segment 3. But thank you so much to all our speakers and panelists today. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. So thank you so much. All right. So, there is so much more to discuss in this area, but unfortunately, you know, we have a schedule to keep here, and we have a great final segment here to talk about insurance. So again, just very much appreciate all the speakers' times and just the level of the expertise that they bring to the table. And we are going to do our best to follow up on some of these questions that we're receiving to the best of our ability. So as we do this transition into segment 3, going to go ahead and change the agenda here. Segment 3 is about looking at the insurance industry when it comes to the cannabis supply chain. And by cannabis, we use the term cannabis to define both marijuana and hemp as a whole, though we're very aware, of course, that hemp is an agricultural commodity that's been legalized, and marijuana, you know, is still, you know, a Schedule I drug under the federal laws. So we absolutely understand that, but we do use cannabis just as the broad term when we're trying to discuss the cannabis industry as a whole. And so here today, we have Peg Brown, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the Colorado Division of Insurance. She's going to just discuss kind of the current state of where insurance policies are at the state level. And we also have Hollis Glenn, who's the Division Director at the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and he led the Colorado Hemp Advancement and Management Plan stakeholder discussions and the upcoming report. So Peg, welcome, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody can hear?
You're looking good.
So,
yep.
Great. Well, it's been interesting to sit through this town hall and hear the previous panels and their discussion, because it's very similar to what we're experiencing in the insurance space for both hemp and cannabis. I found Mr. Podvin's discussion about the intersectional issues between state and federal government, because as we know, this is still an illegal area in the context of the federal government, but here in Colorado, we have the benefit of state law and forward thinking that makes it legal and is establishing the regulatory structure for it. I found Mr. Burt's discussion of the legal and regulatory risks, and that, you know, we've kind of gotten by some of the legal risks, but that puts in place a much more significant regulatory risk. And I would say that we've also learned a lot from the CHAMP initiative and ensuring along the supply chain. The cannabis and hemp industries are not monolithic in that they are one particular segment of industry, but they include a number of things, from the growers to the processors to the transporters to the sellers, and all of those are business opportunities that need banking and need insurance. So it is quite a challenge. We have a variety of intersections that are occurring, and insurance is one of the places that, because the risk is great, because the vast majority of insurance companies do operate interstate, they're hesitant to come into this space. But we are working with a number of them to become Colorado licensed and recognized insurance companies. We do have some companies that are providing very specific products, such as workers' comp for the industry, and we have coverage for hemp crops under the federal crop insurance program. One is a state-based issue because the primary provider of workers' comp coverage is a Colorado domestic insurance company. The other is a federal insurance program that the insurance companies are more likely to sign up for within. There is, however, another avenue that I anticipate we will hear some from Patrick McMahon from CanAssure, and that is non-regulated by the state, but it is available to people and to the cannabis industry through what we call surplus lines. Surplus lines, our insurance carriers are not regulated by Colorado, but are providing coverage where there is not a regulated market here in Colorado. The good news is that there are also signs that traditional insurance is moving toward providing coverage for cannabis in Colorado. Colorado has received 2 filings from advisory organizations in the property and casualty industry, which these advisory organizations are made up of traditional insurance carriers, and they provide forms that the traditional insurance carriers can adopt and then file with us for the premiums and the rates. We have had 2 of these entities file the forms in Colorado. You will hear from one of them today, Mr. Jonas from Cannabop. And just within the past month, ISO, or the Insurance Services Office, which is a very large national organization, has filed forms to add cannabis and hemp business classifications for companies to use on commercial insurance. And while these filings have been made and Colorado has reviewed them and accepted them as filed, at this point, no insurance company has filed the necessary premium rates to offer these products in Colorado. But because we have broken the ground with these filings, we are very interested in seeing insurance companies take this banner up and meet the need of the market in Colorado. With that, I'll turn it over to Hollis.
Hi, thank you, Peg. Appreciate that. And thank you, Rebecca, Dora, and everyone here taking the time with their busy schedules, particularly this time of year, to join us on this important webinar and this really important conversation, this evolving conversation. I'm Hollis Glenn. I'm a division director for the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and as mentioned before, I helped oversee or implement the Colorado Hemp Advancement and Management Plan Initiative, which was a very, very large stakeholder-driven project to really look at the hemp supply chain from beginning to end and look at it in 2 different spheres. We had the advancement side, how do we promote this industry, how do we grow this industry, and then the management side, how do we manage it, how do we do the regulatory side, because the philosophy at the beginning was really we cannot advance the hemp industry without first also examining the management, the regulatory side. Similar, we can't really develop the regulatory structure without focusing on what advancement opportunities need to be focused on so we don't stifle that advancement. So really you have to look at advancement and management simultaneously. And this is no more, sorry, this is as true across the supply chain in regards to banking and insurance products. One of the very first aha moments that the executive committee had in developing and looking at this CHAMP initiative was really when we look at the supply chain. Banking and insurance needs really in this supply chain you see before us, we have it at the end, really is not a true accurate depiction of the role banking and insurance plays in the supply chain. It's not at the end. It is permeated throughout the supply chain. So one of the big takeaways from the management plan, and again, it is a plan that provides general guidance on how Colorado can go forward, both on the regulatory and the advancement side, with specific recommendations from industry stakeholders, many of whom are on the previous panels, for banking and insurance needs. And one of the big takeaways, one of the key principles that will be featuring in this plan is that, again, banking and insurance really transcends the entire supply chain. And what do we mean by that supply chain? Well, when we look at it, we start on the farm. I'm from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and this is specifically regarding hemp. So let's talk about the farm. We talk about the needs for seed, good seed genetics, certification of seeds, good R&D that needs to be done in the field of, not literally, but in the field of hemp cultivation and product advancement. So we have R&D, we have seed, we have the cultivation, so we have the workforce, we have the farming, we have the farming equipment, we have testing and testing requirements of the product to ensure that it is compliant material. We have transportation, which is a big area in the supply chain with lots of questions for the state, not just Colorado, but quite frankly for the country to figure out as we start to see these products going across state lines. And then of course we have processing and manufacturing, two areas that I feel personally, and one of the big takeaways from the CHAMP discussion was really the need for banking and insurance to be supported, to support this part of the supply chain, the processing and the manufacturing, the need for Colorado to develop and stand up the processing manufacturing units. We have the farmers, that's for sure. We need the processing and we need the manufacturing entities to complete the supply chain. And then finally, we have the marketing side as far as making sure we have clean labels, we have good consumer protection and consumer awareness of what the products they are that they're buying. It's we have good quality, that there's good assurance that they are buying a compliant product. And then again, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the banking and insurance side, which transcends that entire supply chain. I was asked here in my brief remarks here to discuss in the CHAMP initiative, we have specific recommendations from the stakeholders that are going to be the baseline for this CHAMP report that is currently being in its final stages of publication and will be available publicly in the new year, early in the new year. And in that, there's 21 specific recommendations from these stakeholders. And these stakeholders, just so you know, include industry, hemp industry, producers, farmers, growers, seed manufacturers, as well as regulatory side. So we had state regulatory, we had DORA involved, we had MED involved, we had CDA, public safety, public health, OED, Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And we had banking, obviously we had banking representatives as stakeholders as well. And so the key recommendations from this large group from different perspectives, local government as well, came, as far as on the insurance side, really came up with two key initiatives or recommendations for Colorado to put forward in a plan going forward. And that first one that I want to share with one is developing guidance and best practices. And essentially what the stakeholders recommended or realized is that Colorado has always been and continues to be a leader in cannabis regulation, and particularly on addressing and tackling with so many of these questions and obstacles that we are facing the banking and insurance industry, that really Colorado should develop those standards, those guidances and best practices to continue this conversation, to help advance the products of banking and insurance to the hemp industry. They want to provide, they want to help destigmatize the hemp industry, and really how that's going to be done. And in the plan is that there is going to be proposed outreach programs to continue the outreach programs and the efforts that DORA is putting forward in bridging that gap between banking, insurance, and the hemp industry. And so really the implementation was to develop targeted meetings with federal, state banking, financial services, as well as the insurance regulators on a frequent basis. So I would contend that from an implementation standpoint, this webinar here today is really right in line with what the stakeholders, both regulatory and industry, are looking for Colorado to lead, is to have these conversations, to grapple and wrestle with these questions and begin to develop a path forward. The second a key recommendation that will be highlighted in the CHAMP blueprint is essentially we want to be able to expand the data availability. We know from listening to our insurance representatives on the stakeholder group that really what does the insurance companies effectively need to feel comfortable getting into this market? And it is data. Obviously it's the data. So we are proposing that the Colorado Department of Agriculture, as well as Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, provide aggregate data regarding our licensees, the number of licensees, the number of growers, the number of processors, the number of farms that are compliant, the percentages that are not compliant. Aggregate data, not specific individual data, mind you, but aggregate data, so the insurance industry can really begin to help build their models in determining and coming and helping them then encourage to get into the hemp space. And then the third recommendation, or recommendation 2B, so to speak, is that we do want to develop a way in which not just aggregate data can be shared with industry, but also there's an ability for a farmer per se at Colorado Department of Agriculture to be able to opt into or allow the CDA to share their registration information, maybe their laboratory information, to a prospective insurance carrier that they're looking to maybe enter into a relationship with, or in a bank. And so right now, currently, it is considered private and confidential business information. Those are not open records open to the public, but we want to explore ways, or what was recommended by the stakeholders is to explore ways in which there would be an opt-in possibility, and for which a hemp registrant, a farmer or a producer, could opt into having that information being shared to a third party, such as an insurance provider, directly by the regulatory agency that's overseeing those records to help authenticate those records. And I think that goes in line with some of the comments that were made in the last meeting or in the last presentation about really what does it take for a bank and an insurance company to feel comfortable, is really they go through and look at every little angle to make sure that they can verify those records are indeed on the up and up. So those are the three main takeaways that are going to be featured in this CHAMP initiative. Again, looking at the entire supply chain and how we can advance and bridge those obstacles and those gaps to increase the insurance products specifically for the hemp industry.
Thank you, Hollis. That was really informative. And as we get into our panel, of course, MED program has also been tackling these issues for many, many years. So go ahead and keep your cameras on, please. And then why don't we have the other panelists who are joining us today go ahead and turn on their cameras and take themselves off mute. Joining us is Joe Jonas with AAIS Canabop and Patrick McManaman. I hope I said that right, Patrick, of CanAssure, as well as Deputy Director Kyle Lambert with the MED program. And moderating the discussion for the final segment is Colorado Division of Insurance Assistant Commissioner Vince Plymell. So Vince, does it look like everybody is on camera and unmuted at this point?
It looks to be so. So we can go ahead and get started. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you,
appreciate it.
I'll pop back when
you're
done.
Okay, and thanks also to Peg and Hollis for teeing up this this question around insurance for us. And well, I'm going to be directing questions, obviously, to Patrick, Joe, and Kyle. Feel free to jump in if you have salient points as well. I want to start with Joe Jonas at AAIS, and ask him to talk a little bit about what AAIS is, what the Canabop program that they developed is, other than the dance phrase sweeping the nation. And also, why did AAIS want to dip their toe into this world?
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. So AAIS, and I think it was mentioned a little bit earlier on, Peg, had mentioned that we are a national advisory organization. We're one of two. So essentially what our role in the insurance industry is, we're not a carrier, we're not a broker, we're a member-based organization. And what we do, we file rates, rules, and forms in all jurisdictions for a variety of different programs, farm and ag, property casualty programs, personal lines, et cetera. And then there's also a compliance standpoint for those folks that are on the carrier side. I'm sure you're well aware, to keep your programs in compliance. There's a lot of due diligence that needs to happen. But to get to your question, we consider ourselves a modern advisory organization. We are constantly looking at evolving exposures and evolving markets, and quickly recognized that the cannabis industry was going to be one of those significant industries. And we began to develop some prototypes of products. But in 2017, we were actually a brand of insurance in California. And they were looking for an advisory organization. They are aware that we had begun some discovery work in this area, and they wanted us to file a program essentially to encourage more market participation. Typically, it's a very shallow pool of carriers that write in California and offer a broader array of options for insureds. So subsequently, we created the Cannabot program. So at its foundation, it's a business owner's policy, which we felt is pretty universally understood for the most part. But what we did, we added enhancements, endorsements, and subsequent rating to account for the cannabis exposure. So the program was filed, ironically, 420 in 2018 in California, and then we've moved to Colorado, Nevada, and we have a slew of additional states where they have recently legalized a recreational use. So it's ultimately our intent to encourage standardization in the insurance marketplace and really encourage more carrier participation, which I think we can all agree is desperately needed.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe. And I think that's a good segue into a question for Patrick from Canasure. Patrick, if you could just briefly again tell us what Canasure is, but also really address some of the challenges and obstacles here in Colorado to getting insured.
Sure. So Canasure is a program manager and managing general agent. As Peg had alluded to in the beginning, we work in the excess and surplus lines industry. So we have relationships with the carriers, specific carriers. It's about a handful, as you guys have alluded to. There's not many options out there. And so on our program side, we actually designed our own policies. We used ISO-based forms for probably 90-something% of our policy form, much like AAAS, standardized forms for a lot of the areas of coverage. And then we had to add in exclusions or other forms to take into account different aspects of the risk associated or potential risk associated with cannabis that may be known or unknown so far. We sell primarily property, general liability, product liability, and excess liability coverages. Those are the main focus that we've had. As we continue to grow in the industry, as Hollis had shown before with the supply chain of all the different areas, we've had to continue to add new products, commercial auto. Just recently, parametric crop insurance is starting to come around. Obviously, the InsurTech world is the COVID-19 has taken what was a very difficult insurance transaction, and they're trying to, and InsurTech is really accelerating that move of using technology to underwrite policies, issue policies, and come up with coverage, and parametric is one of those. So it's just come out in the last couple months and is available for hemp. It is expensive because it's the first one in the marketplace for hemp, so no one quite knows where to go. But there's lots of different perils that you can have in there, from hail, drought, wildfire, frost, so on and so forth. And you're going to be using, for example, in hail, there would actually be sensors placed around different locations on the property to take into account the size of the hail that's coming in, because you can buy coverage based on the size and how much it actually geographically covered in your policy area. You have, so there's, if it's rain, you're going to be using meteorological scales and not the insurance company. It's a third party, National Weather Service, so on and so forth, to adjust those claims. And most importantly, make the claims payment process very quickly, because there is no did we or didn't we. It's here's what the system said. Here's what the National Weather System said about a tornado coming through your area. Here's what the region was. Here's the path of the tornado. You get paid. It's not sending 10 people out there to go see if you actually did or you didn't. You can use the satellite imagery. So those are some of the things that have been challenges. Obviously, cropping coverage, especially for the hemp industry, has been very difficult. It's been non-existent. For most of the marijuana industry, it is non-existent. There's been talk of these carriers being willing to look at least the medical side when it comes to the crop parametric coverage. Not so far for the adult use side just yet. Goes back to everything that we've all talked about, the difference between state and federal law, which you don't need me to get into because we've talked about it ad nauseum. So, from Colorado standpoint, I think, one of the things that I love about Colorado is where we got our start in our business. We spent the first 2 years, 2009, 10, and 11 in California, and realized very quickly that was not the place for us to be. And Colorado was the place for us to be because of the regulatory system in place, the business owners, the attitude towards compliance, and so on and so forth. And that's why we decided to make sure that we really focused on that area. I think the challenge you find is there's not a lot of sophisticated insurance agents potentially that understand what this industry is. And so you have to go and find those agents. You can't just assume that the guy you bought your home and auto business insurance is going to have an understanding of this space, and you need to find some experts when it comes to that. And then, of course, again, the last thing would just be there's just not a ton of coverage out there. When Lloyd's pulled out, that was a huge portion of the marketplace that's traditionally come in, and it just they haven't been around since 2015. So it's just those are biggest issues.
Thank you. My next question for Kyle from Department of Revenue, Marijuana Enforcement Division. What trends are you seeing any trends involving issues with the MED licensees staying in compliance during the seed to sale process, especially in regards to this world of insurance?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Vince, for posing that. I think, we've seen, I think Patrick just alluded to kind of an evolution in this industry. We're focused on the marijuana side of things. Hollis Glenn did a great job outlining the supply chain and the different considerations at each step along the way. I think as it relates to banking and insurance, as this conversation goes, is the specifically the seed to sale inventory tracking can help those industries kind of meet their own regulatory requirements, help mitigate risks that come with this industry. So we've certainly seen evolution in, the traceability aspects for potential recall situations that would be of interest, I think, in the insurance world. We've seen the continued building out of the API capabilities. So certainly no financial institutions are leveraging the API. It gives a real-time line of sight to licensees' inventory accounts. Again, providing kind of that oversight to help mitigate some of the regulatory risk there. We've also just seen the collection of data through inventory tracking that's really informed the conversation through the CHAMP initiative. We're able to look at the trends that are emerging, just the evolution of products themselves. What are people consuming? What is being sold out there? I think that's really important to the insurance world, is understanding what folks are consuming, what's being sold, what's manufactured, and then being able to identify some risks involved. So we've certainly seen kind of a parallel path on the growth in these industries and kind of the impacts on the inventory tracking system from MED's point of view.
Great. I think I know we're getting short on time, and I wanted to allow time for some of the questions from the audience. But just as a quick lightning round for everybody, and kind of think of your answer in terms of bullet points here. suggestions for the cannabis businesses struggling to get insured? Any thoughts out there? Just go ahead and share them, and anybody here in the group.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. You know, as I mentioned earlier, it's a relatively shallow pool of insurance carriers, but that doesn't mean there aren't good options. And I think Patrick hit the nail on the head when he suggested partnering with a consultant that is familiar with the cannabis industry. And the types of insurance. If you're operating in multi-states, there's some carriers that will write in one state and not another. So you're often piecemealing a risk management program together. I think it's really incumbent upon the consultant, broker, you know, however you like to title yourself, to really do your due diligence on policy language. Because there is a lot of disparity with the types of coverage being written, a lot of manuscripted policies. Hence our initiative to bring some sort of, you know, standardization. So it really is incumbent upon you know, the experts to help guide the insureds, the cannabis businesses to the right solution.
Good deal. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just say that we all too often, from an underwriting perspective, people don't take the application process as seriously as it should be taken. They provide handwritten, scribbled notes that are almost illegible to read. And just like anyone, an underwriter is a human being, and you got to make a decision. And if you can't understand what someone's doing, you're going to move on to the next person that's provided you a much better application, if you will. So you take that application process seriously and use it as your opportunity to tell your story as to what you're doing and why you differentiate yourself from somebody else in the space. Because you can gain a lot of advantage from that in terms of rate, but then obviously potentially in terms of negotiations when it comes to, as Joe alluded to, the different exclusions that you may be able to negotiate off of your policy. And so that will be helpful when you have that type of presentation. But when you show up with a handwritten document, it's pretty difficult to do.
Excellent. So now I'll throw it over to Rebecca and Courtney. Do we have time for any questions from the audience on this topic?
Well, unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the town hall. I do want to do a quick wrap up, but we did get some questions in that we'll go ahead and include in that overall FAQ that we're developing. And Vince, unfortunately, we're just going to have to wrap this discussion. And thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We'll definitely be coming back and revisiting this topic very soon. So thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers and panelists, all of them. Well, so just a few quick items to discuss as we close the town hall out. First, you know, again, the Courtney, the questions we received have been so great, and Courtney and Chaz and Vince serving as backup and really trying to manage some of the back end. I really appreciate the work that they're doing, and I really appreciate all the attendees who've stayed for the town hall and participated by asking your questions. Also, a big thanks goes to Ian at the governor's office, as well as Shannon and Jim at DOR, and Wandrad and Hollis at CDA for being such great partners. Really appreciate it. And so even though we weren't able to get to all of your questions, I think I saw a toll that we got almost 100 questions or so. We'll be compiling and reviewing what you sent to us, and also be sending out some of the materials from the presentation itself. And also this session has been recorded and it will be made available online. So just a quick reminder to MED licensees also that you received a survey that was sent to you yesterday. It covers many of the topics that we discussed today, and your input on that is extremely important. It helps us understand the state of the market over and beyond the discussion that happened today. And then also be on the lookout for more information about upcoming town halls, which Jim and Shannon covered in the beginning, the next one covering social equity. Finally, a quick plug that CDPHE is hiring for a retail marijuana education coordinator, and that link is right there in the agenda slide, so be sure to check that out. And just a big thank you to all of you for attending. I'm going to go ahead and put up this final poll here. If you have time to stick around and answer that poll, that would be great. Otherwise, have a wonderful, happy, and safe holiday. Ian, do you want to say anything as we close out?
I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Rebecca for coordinating this. This was awesome. I was getting a lot of messages during this, a lot of emails from people as to how worthwhile this is. And we thank you all for spending 2.5 hours with us. We had over 400 people at one point paying attention today. More to come. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Dora. Thank you to all of our speakers, and happy holidays. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.